Okay.
This is Jerry Fry, Chairman of the Audio History Committee and Audio Historian of the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. The following is a professional history of a PPB member told by himself in his own fashion on December 5th, 2005. These interviews are being audio taped in order to compile firsthand a living history of our members and their professional experiences. We are the few who remain from what is called the golden age of radio and television, and this is an attempt to preserve as much data as possible for succeeding generations. This recording is not intended for broadcast without first obtaining permission from the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. With me is Tommy Cook, and Tommy Cook is a name that most people will remember from such things as, well, Red Wilder and Blondie, in my case. Let's start at the very beginning, Tommy, and tell me where you were born and what kind of a childhood you had.
Well, thank you, Jerry. It's nice being with you. All started 1930, July 5th, Duluth, Minnesota. And, I have no recollection of the first 5 years of my life because my dad became quite ill and we decided to come out to California where the weather was a little bit nicer. And my dad had to take the train, and the rest of us were in a car. I guess my mom hired a chauffeur, and we had a horrible accident in Van Horn, Texas. And nobody was killed, but everybody seriously injured. And I have no recollection. I remember putting the ether across my forehead. That's what they use for anesthetizing, the injury in those days.
I
and I was going, the smell, and going, around. But I have no recollection. But I have a very, very good memory from that time on. But anyway, they tell me that my mother loved the theater, and she used to invite the members of the little repertory companies that would appear in Duluth and invite them over for tea and crumpets and stuff. She had no aspirations to be an actress or anything, but she loved the theater. And they also tell me that I used to, when I was 3 or 4 years old, put on funny clothes and entertain my grandmother, who was, I guess, had Parkinson's disease, creeping paralysis. And they tell me that I used to entertain her. And when my folks belonged to some private club, I got up on the table and started dancing and improvising. Again, that's what they tell me. Anyway, when we came out to California, my mom thought that I might have some talent. And I started out at the Pasadena Playhouse when I was about 8 years old. And the first play I did, I got the lead, Peter Goes to the Fair. And I had a gift, a God-given gift of a great memory, and I not only knew my lines, but I knew everybody else's lines in the play.
Oh, wow.
And Betty Smith was the director, and at the Laboratory Theater, at the Pasadena Playhouse, was one of the great legitimate playhouses in those days. The one down in Dallas, and there was one in the Midwest. There are 3 or 4 top colleges, playhouses, and the Pasadena Playhouse had some of the great actors of the lost generation there. So I did 8 straight plays, and then my mother, in a magazine, saw an advertisement for a free radio audition at NBC, the historic NBC studios at Sunset and Vine. And May Reagan was the head of the Artists Bureau there. And so my mother called in or arranged for an audition, and so I went there, and I got called back a couple of weeks later to audition for Arch Oboler. Now, in the halcyon days of radio, Arch Oboler, Norman Corwin, and Orson Welles were the big 3. They were writer, director, producers. And so I was called in to audition for Mr. Oboler, and I got the role because I had the youngest sounding voice. They needed a real young kid. and I didn't know what a cue or anything, what a page was. My mother had to pay a page boy $5 to tell me what a cue was, from the director and the booth. And so they put me on this big. I'm a midget, I'm only 5'7", barely right now. So you can imagine when I was 8 years old. So they put me on this bench to talk, and I got the role. And for some reason, I don't know where I got it, Jerry, but it called for a young kid with a German accent.
Really?
I don't know where, but I could do certain accents. And so I did a little German boy.
Had you been exposed to German?
No, I don't know. My mother was German on her side. My dad was a Latvian. Lithuanian on his side, and I guess her grandmother, my mom's grandmother, was from Buchau, Austria. And but I don't know. Anyway, I got the role, and Arch called me back to do another couple of shows, and now I'm on a radio show, Every Man's Theater. Oxidol was the commercial. Frank Martin and Jim Bannon were the announcers on the show.
Really?
And Alla Nazimova, the great Russian actress, was the star of the show. So we'd finished the show, and Arch starts to complain. He says, I got to go to Chicago next week. I got to do this. The cute kid, Dickie Highland, there's a show for him, and I don't want to go to Chicago. And Alla Nazimova said, Arch, what do you need to do that? Use little Tommy Cook. So he thought about it, and he decided to stay in town, and that was the first radio show that I ever starred on, called Problem Papa, written, produced, and directed by Arch Obler.
Wow.
And my parents were Mercedes McCambridge and Frank Lovejoy.
Oh, my gosh.
Were my parents on that show.
Two of the biggest.
And, of course, Arch had the greatest of all times radio stock company, from the Hans Conried, who could do everything, Elliot Lewis, Byron Kane, the greats of radio.
Yeah.
And from then on, I starred in 5 radio shows for Arch. He had a show for the on NBC. What the devil was the name of that series? But it was all about the war. And I remember doing one show, Paul Reversky, and in the show, I'm about 11 years old, and his father tells him that America's in big trouble, and we all got to get in there, and we've got to help. This is World War II, of course, and we've all got to do our thing. So the little kid, Paul, he goes down and he tries to enlist in the Marines, and of course they laugh him off, and they said, go try the Navy, fella. And so I go to the Navy and I try to enlist, and they give me the same. I go to all the different, the Air Force and the Army, and nobody will have me, and I end up in a park, and there's Hans Conried. He's a conscientious objector, and he's got this letter. He's been drafted, and why me? Why should they take me? I don't have anything against anyone, And I finally understand what he's talking about, and I said, sir, give me your letter. That's what I want. I can enlist now. I can enlist. America says we're in real trouble. And Hans says, kid, just go on home to your folks. And it ends up Gordon Jenkins doing all the music.
Oh,
the
wow.
great Gordon Jenkins did all of Arch's music. And I said, gee whiz, and I end up, nobody will have me. I can't do anything. Gee whiz, and I break down. And that was, those were so beautifully written. Arch
This is
Obler,
before Arch Obler did Lights Out. Lights Out came later?
No, Lights Out was before.
Was
Lights
before?
Out, yeah.
Oh.
Actually, I don't think he created that show. From what research I've read, he took it over. Somebody actually started that, and then he took it over and gave it all the
that show used to scare the
oh,
bejesus out of me when
right.
growing up in Spokane.
But
I listened to it
he
every
started
week.
doing that in Chicago or something, I think, before
he?
he brought it to Hollywood. But I think Lights Out was before. But the two shows, and then when I was 12, Arch set me to MC a show, I think it was the March of Dimes, honoring President Roosevelt on his 60th birthday. And I introduced 16 of the top artists in the business, everyone from Humphrey Bogart to James Cagney, and I spoke to President Roosevelt on the show, wishing him a happy birthday. And that was
wow.
majestic moments,
Yeah.
fabulous. But what I wanted to say about Arch, I did a show with Orson Welles, and I did the great show, My Client Curly, which was one of Norman Corwin's great shows. I did it at CBS. Irving Reese was the director of the show. But Arch had that ability to write for the actors that he had in mind. In other words, one week Hans Conried would be starring in a show, the next week, he had some of the top stars. Betty Davis used to work for him a lot, and then Hans Conried would star in a show, etc. But he could write in such a way that it just sort of came right out of you. It was me, it was a little kid talking.
Yeah.
And Arch would never let me rehearse. Once in a while, when he was auditioning for different characters on the show, in which I was set to play the principal role, he would let me audition with people that he wanted to hear. But then he wouldn't let me have the script until the dress rehearsal. Would not allow me to woodshed. And then, of course, the dress rehearsal where they had to time everything, and then we'd go right on the air. But it was just like it was just like it was written for me. You didn't have to look at the words or anything. It was just I could just imagine. You could just see that. And Mercedes was Arch's favorite actress. Now he worked with Lorene Tuttle and Virginia Gregg and Frank Lovejoy's wife, Elliot Lewis's wife. What was Elliot's wife's name? Pardon me? Kathy Lewis, right. He worked with great, but Mercedes was his favorite. And I can remember Mercedes starring in a show, and she was so wrapped up in her role that, remember now, this is radio. You're reading off a script. It was like she was on Broadway on the stage, and she took that script and she pressed it against her chest, and she just worked opposite, the mic to that actor that she was working with, and just like she was on the stage.
Wow.
Yeah, she was.
Now you're saying Mercedes, and I've heard Mercedes.
Yes,
which
both.
Which is
maybe
what
Mercedes in the early days.
Okay.
And she was a very good friend of my mother. Mercedes had a lot of tragedy in her life. When she was very young, she had an alcohol problem, and she used to discuss it with my mom.
Really?
My mom was like my best agent. She got me in the business, and she was one of the good stage mothers. There's nothing more horrible than a bad stage mother.
Yeah.
And I used to tell my mom, I said, hey, just stay in the background, Ma. Do your knitting, and don't ever say how wonderful your son is, to everybody. Just keep it cool. And she was a very well-respected and one of the real fine mothers of young kids in the show business. And she was a good friend, and Mercedes used to discuss her problems with my mother. And then, of course, Mercedes had a great tragedy with one of her children, I guess, committing suicide. But what a brilliant, brilliant actress. Of course, she ended up winning the Oscar.
Yep.
And what was it, for All the King's Men.
Mm-hmm.
But the greatest people I've ever worked with were in the radio business. I've done a lot of TV. I was starred in 6 independent films, one of which I won the Photoplay Award, a film called The Vicious Years, written by N. Richard Nash, who wrote The Rainmaker. But the nicest and the best people I ever worked with were in radio. Those are my most cherished memories.
I remember a show that I discovered last night on the internet and didn't know you were a part of, but I used to listen to all the time when I was a kid. Smilin' Ed's Buster Brown.
Oh, yeah, Ed
Gang.
McConnell.
Yeah.
Smilin' Ed McConnell. We would do that real early in the morning. It was done at NBC. I guess the audience was about 300 kids, young kids.
Yeah.
They'd have that. I'm Smilin' Ed McConnell. I come in a shoe. What is it? I remember the commercial.
And he had a dog.
Pardon me. Yeah,
Yeah.
There's my dog.
Sparky, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember, but Sure, I did a lot of those shows.
And June Foray was in that
Oh,
cast?
yes, June Foray. Didn't her first husband, Hobie Donovan, was the producer-director of that show.
Oh.
And, yep. And, he's all the time. June is one of the all-time greats. But I ended up doing about 3,000 radio shows. And, you know, in the good old days, you would do the show around 4:30 or 5 o'clock for the East, and then you come back and you do the Western version
Right.
at 7 or 8 o'clock.
And most people I hear by the grapevine used to go out to the nearest saloon between shows. But little Tommy Cook surely didn't do that.
Well, I'll tell you one instance. First of all, I must say, I was at one time under contract to all three networks. I was doing Little Beaver on the Red Ryder show. That's the old ABC Blue Network, Studio H at NBC. I was Junior on The Life of Riley, NBC, with William Bendix. Paula Winslow, she was just great. John Brown, who played Digger Odell.
What a character.
What a great cast we had. Irving Brecker was the creator, brilliant writer, starting at MGM. And I was Alexander on the Blondie show.
That's where I first heard your name.
CBS.
Yep.
CBS. I used to sneak across when Ozzie and Harriet were first starting. Ricky and David were too young, and I used to sneak over and I played little Ricky for a couple of the shows. Then we did ours on Studio C, which had a nice audience. But the big studio at CBS was Studio A, and the Fanny Bryce show emanated from Studio A, and a young Danny Thomas, who first got started coming from the Midwest, used to do a few minutes of his comedy, stand-up comedy routine on the show, and I would sneak over and play Fanny Bryce's boyfriend on a couple of the episodes. So those were such beautiful days.
On Baby Snooks, Hanley Stafford was the daddy, but
yes.
he was also Mr. Dithers.
Mr. Dithers.
Blondie.
Absolutely, and he married this gorgeous gal, Viola Vaughn. Remember Viola?
Oh, did he?
Oh, yeah. And you know, Hanley Stafford, they counted on him to rewrite. He was a great writer, and he used to change lines and everything and make them funnier and better.
Huh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Mr. Dithers, he was great. And Elvia Allman was on the show. Billy Arntz did the music. Wilbur Hatch did the music. Billy Arntz did the sound on the show. What memories?
Don't touch that dial.
Oh.
was that Ken Niles? Who was the announcer? in Blondie?
Ken Niles.
Ken Niles.
He also was the announcer on Life of Riley.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
But and we used to Arthur Lake, who was Dagwood on the show, he was really the star of the show, even though it was Blondie, Penny Singleton.
Right.
He was that role day in and day out. And 15 or 20 minutes before the first show to the East, around 4:30 in the afternoon, he would rush across, and I would follow him, because I used to dress up with a little bow tie just like him. And he would rush across the street to Columbia Studios, and the guard there, he says, I need to get in. I need to go to my dressing room. I need to get my clothes for the radio show. He would dress up for the radio show.
Yeah.
And so he would dash in there, and I'd dash with him, and he'd put on the outfit, and then he would dash back 2 minutes before we would go on the air, and he was in the restroom there fiddling around with his bow tie and would get out on the stage just when it was time to say, Blondie, you know. But that was the routine. He had to go through that every week.
Oh, amazing.
Gosh.
Amazing. Now, Penny Singleton, I'm guessing, was an awfully nice lady. She certainly sounded that way.
She was great. I'll tell you another bit. She ended up doing voiceovers for Hanna-Barbera cartoons, did a lot of stuff with June Foray. And now I did voiceovers for two or three Hanna-Barbera cartoons, The Phantom Funky and my mind, Senile Moment. But anyway, I did a couple of series, and they called all the old-timers that did voiceovers for the Hanna-Barbera cartoon series. They were honoring Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera 40 or 50 miles away, and they had this big bus to take us all down there, and they had a big orchestra, and they had this huge what am I saying? I'm losing my memory here. Not a stage, but they had this where they showed different cartoons, Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and it was a baseball field where they were doing it. And on the bus is Penny Singleton. I haven't seen her in 50 years.
Wow.
And I tell you, I saw her. We hugged each other, and the tears coming down, and she said, Tommy, she says, I don't know how they put up with it. She said, I was always giving everybody such trouble, you know.
Yeah.
And she loved Arthur, but there were a lot of differences because each of them thought it was their show, and Arthur Dagwood got all the laughs and all the stuff was revolving around him, but it was the Blondie show.
Sure.
And you know something, in the good old days at Columbia Studios, they kept Columbia in the black. I mean, those Blondie
The movies.
movies, that were made for Spit.
Yeah.
You know, they made a lot of money, and they were very, very popular. Yeah,
All
so
the
that
kids
was
loved
very
them.
important to Columbia Pictures. So a great background.
In those days, you know, you think back, we had visual pictures of what you people looked like, listening to you on the radio every week, and then suddenly here's a movie, and we could actually go see the people that we've been listening to.
Well, Larry Sims was they called him Baby Dumpling in the first days of the show, and so I never did the film.
No.
I just did the radio show, and they changed it to Alexander.
But you did go into films later on.
Oh yes, I went into
Teenage
films.
Crime Wave.
Oh, I did that when I got out of the Marine Corps. For Sam Katzman, Fred Sears directing it at Columbia Studios. Yeah, I played a crazy, mixed-up young crime kid.
And you were in Stalag 17. That was a
well,
big one.
Stalag 17. That was really nothing. I was in the Marine Corps. I went to UCLA for 2 years, and then went to the Philippines to make American Guerrilla in the Philippines. I played the Philippine underground leader. Tyrone Power was the star, Micheline Prel, the French actress, and Tom Ewell was in it. And we were there shooting for about 4.5 months, and great adventures. I spoke Bisayan, and Tagalog is their main title. You see, I forgot it already. Inig bata, mahal kita. That means I love you in Tagalog. Doon na hapondini. So I still remember, and I was a walking arsenal. I had a rifle, and I had a two-bladed balasang knife, and I had a .45. And we used to go to all these jungles that were uninhabited. I don't know how they could take a chance on us shooting there. And they had the Huckabaloos, they called them. They were the communist guerrillas, and they were going and they were setting our sets on fire and looting from us and everything. Great. But anyway, I come back, and I lose my eligibility at UCLA. So I'm drafted. Well, I didn't want to go in the Army. So I pulled the deal, and they were opening up a new division in the Marine Corps. And so I snuck in, and I became a Marine at San Diego Marine Corps Training Depot, and then Camp Pendleton. I called up my mom, and I said, I'm going, Mom, I'm going. She said, well, you're going up to Fort Ord in the Army? I said, no, Mom, I'm not. I'm going down to San Diego. I'm in the Marine Corps. Boom, went the phone.
Oh, but
know.
yeah.
Wow. But I was so
how
very
old were you
proud.
then?
22. I went in, I was 22. I was, 1952.
Okay.
And I was in, and while just before my term ended, I was in Battle Cry, the Marine Corps film. We went down to Vegas Island and Puerto Rico shooting. Then we came back to San Diego and Camp Pendleton to finish. I stayed on a little longer in my term. But
did you have any overseas experience?
No, I was trained in infantry, advanced infantry at Tent Camp 2 at Camp Pendleton, ready to go to Korea.
Yeah.
And I was pulled off at the last moment and put in PIO, Public Information Office. The Marine Corps had a radio show called Marines in Review, a national show on ABC. And I ended up playing the hero, the Marine hero, in each of the shows. And they thought I could, with my background, that I would. And then we opened up a show called At Ease for Marine recruiting at the old KTLA studios on Melrose there. And So I was very proud. At one time I wanted to be a Medal of Honor winner. I cried when we had our first parade, and I'm just a private, and we would salute the Major General there on the grounds, and very proud, very proud.
Yeah.
But I was pulled off a draft, and I guess I'm thankful for that.
Yes, you could have ended up in Korea very nicely.
Yeah.
At that time of the year. 1977, you became a producer with Roller Coaster, I believe.
Well, not a producer. What happened is that when I got out of the Marine Corps, I did Teenage Crime Wave, and I did 3 or 4. I was co-starred on a Climax, which was a live television show with Rory Calhoun. We did a recreation of the fight film with Kirk Douglas. What was that?
Champion?
The Champion. I played the Arthur Kennedy, the brother, the crippled brother role.
Oh.
And then I decided maybe I'll go back to New York and do some studying. And had an interview with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. He had no interest in me whatsoever. He was looking for another Marilyn Monroe. And so I went to see Sandy Meisner, had the Neighborhood Playhouse, another great training program. And he accepted me. But I ended up going back to Colorado and did Night Passage with James Stewart. I played Audie Murphy's brother, a Western. And when I came back 2 or 3 months later, the session was already over with. Anyway, my dad got sick again, and I came home. I'll tell you a quick story. I meet Shelley Winters. I made Cry of the City. I had a short-term contract at 20th Century Fox. I did a film where I played an Argentinian jockey, Homestretch, with Cornell Wilde, Maureen O'Hara, and at that time. And I also did Cry of the City. I was Richard Conte's brother and Victor Mature, Deborah Paget's first film, and one of Shelley Winters' first films. So I'm back in New York now, and I got to come home. My dad's sick, and I have this old junky car that I kept there to go out to the suburbs. I got rid of that, and I run into Shelley at a party, and I said, I got to get home. She says, really, you're going back to L.A.? I want to get my car back there. Would you be interested in driving my car? I said, yes. She said, well, meet me tomorrow. I wanted to see how you drive. I know everything will be fine. And so I meet her, and she said, do you mind if I stopped off? I got to see my psychiatrist. And I said, okay, I'll just wait in the car. And about half hour later, she comes out, tears running down her face. I said, what's the matter, Shelley? He told me that I should break up with Anthony Franciosa, that he's no good for me and never work, and just to find somebody else in your life. And I said, well, I don't know what to say, Shelley. What about my drive? Oh, it's fine. Just take the car and go home. I'm halfway through the States, going back to L.A. I turn on the radio, and she's eloped with Anthony Franciosa.
That's right. I remember that.
Oh, gosh. But anyway, to get back to your thing about Roller Coaster.
A lot of big names in that movie.
What happened is I came back, and there were doubts in my mind about maintaining myself as an actor. You know, in radio, nobody looks at you. I could do anything, kid roles, didn't matter.
Right.
But I was short and tough-looking and stuff, and somehow I didn't follow through like my contemporaries, Robert Blake, who was brilliant, and Dean Stockwell, etc. But I loved the profession so much. I needed to stay in it, and I decided if I'm going to stay in it, I better create something for myself, and or I better get on the creative end of it, And so I woke up one morning, and I look at the calendar section of the L.A. Times, and the headlines is the last of the giant roller coasters. The giant dippers, the classic wooden coasters. Yeah. And I thought about that, and I knew there'd been bits and pieces of roller coaster in films, but never as the star of the film. And so I started creating a story idea in my mind, and I could see it all happening. I just stayed in bed with my eyes open, coming up with these ideas, and I could see I really started getting out of it, and I'm saying, yes, and I'm going to make this picture, and there's going to be a private showing at the Academy, and by goodness, it all happened. And I brought in somebody. I'd never really written anything, but I gave the whole story to a guy that I had worked with in television that I'd known, and Sanford Sheldon, and I gave him the story, and he put it into words for me, and I did a marketing concept. And I took it to Jennings Lang, who was a producer and who knew me from tennis. I was a junior tennis champion, put on a lot of celebrity charity tennis events. And he lived next door to Dean Martin, and I did some tennis teaching at Dean Martin's house. So anyway, I took the project over to him, and he bought it. And it was Roller Coaster. But I was not really producer on it. And there were a lot of problems business-wise on that film, which I don't care to go into. But I did very well on that film.
Susan Strasberg was in it.
Susan Strasberg, and guess who, at 12 years old, won the Academy Award?
Helen Hunt.
Helen Hunt.
Yeah.
She was about 12 years old and had...
must have been one of her first roles.
Oh, yeah. Harry, can't think of his name, but a good friend of mine, a character actor, was in that.
Henry Fonda.
Henry
Widmark,
Fonda.
George Siegel.
Yeah.
And an
George
old friend of
Siegel.
mine that I was surprised to find out.
They made a couple of mistakes. Who was that?
Charlie Tuna.
Who? Charlie Tuna.
Charlie
Yes,
Tuna.
when we locationed.
Can you believe that?
Yes, we locationed when Magic Mountain in
Uh-huh.
Valencia first opened, but they had the aluminum kind of roller coasters there. They just started with that, getting away from the wooden coasters. I gave them a breakdown of the 10 scariest theme parks around the country, in Canada and down in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Really the scary ones, basically with the wooden coasters.
Yeah.
I mean, they were so scary that the the whole framework, would
Wiggled.
reverberate,
Yeah.
and people would just stand up waiting for an accident,
Sure.
And they all turned us down because there was the story, the culprit, the bad guy, tries to he pulls a deal where he tries to frame the companies to pay him money so that he won't cause any disasters on the roller coasters, etc. So they were afraid, because of the story element, they were afraid to allow a company to come and shoot.
Oh,
and
I
so
see.
here, right in the neighborhood of Universal,
Uh-huh.
is this new opening of Magic Mountain, and Charlie Tuna was there to do the emceeing, etc. They made two mistakes on that film. Number one is that the roller coaster was the star of the film, and at the end where they had the fight scene and everything, it should have taken place on the roller coaster.
Sure.
Number one. And number two, the young kid, Timothy Bottoms, played the young villain in it, and it should have been just the other way around. Timothy, they veered from my original storyline to an extent, but the young kid should have been the hero, because that young kid resonates and speaks to the young audience, and this was a picture for the young audience that dominates the box office.
Sure.
And George Siegel was the main, and he played a character who was trying to beat a smoking habit and everything, and he was not the most pleasurable, interesting kind of guy that you could feel for, and so I found some, Levinson and Link ended up writing the screenplay, and of course they were brilliant, but those are the problems that come up
You
on
never know.
a film. But go ahead, Jerry.
Timothy Bottoms was just in. I just saw him last night in Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, really?
Hadn't seen him for years.
Yeah, well, the whole Bottoms family, the two or three of the brothers were brilliant. My dear friend James Franciscus, who he had his own celebrity charity tennis tournament for Retarded Children's Foundation of the Desert. We did it for 10 straight years down in the Palm Desert area, and he was called in, and he turned down the role, not enough money or something. I felt very bad. Wanted him to be in it. But it was a good film.
Good.
It was a good film. And but that's the way my career went. I considered myself... I'll tell you what Roller Coaster did, Jerry. It opened up a series of roller coaster themed parks around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Down in Orlando, Universal has a series of theme parks, and each one of them is highlighted by a roller coaster. And
Yeah.
so that film opened up
That's what did it.
because roller coaster was the number one attraction at theme parks. And more people were interested in going on the roller coaster than any of the other activities at a theme park. Also, in doing my research, I found out that more people attend theme parks than all sports events combined. You know, and so of course I use that as part of my selling of this film to Universal, and but that opened up, that started a whole trend of roller coaster themed parks. So I consider myself, that was in the middle '70s, as sort of a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And then, having been in the tennis field, I was a pretty darn good junior tennis player on the Junior Davis Cup team. I won the All-City, All-Southern California championship 2 years at L.A. High. And in the interim, I taught tennis, and as I mentioned before, at one time at Dean Martin's house. And I am the one that originally created the Bobby Riggs, Billie Jean King Battle of the Sexes. And I signed both Bobby to play Billie Jean King, and at the same time, unbeknownst to Bobby, I signed Jack Kramer to play Billie Jean King. I knew Bobby had the personality, you know, and could make more of a show out of this event, but he wasn't that well known to the general public, and Jack Kramer was the much more of a contemporary world champion, and so I signed both of them. My option ran out, and Bobby did the smart thing. He issued a challenge through the media, and Margaret Court of Australia, the great champion, Grand Slam champion, took him 10,000 winner take all, and there was the Mother's Massacre in San Diego Country Estates. I was there with Bobby, and then Jerry Perenchio took over and became Bobby's partner, and between the two of us, we put on the Battle of the Sexes at the Houston Astrodome, the largest crowd in tennis history, just under 50,000 people.
Tennis was just catching hold on television then.
And but I'll tell you what that did. That opened up women's sports. And with Billie Jean winning that, it changed the whole flavor and nature of women's sports, which was at a low ebb in those years. This was in 1973. And, of course, you know where women's sports is now, with golf and women's basketball in college. It's big, big time. And that opened up the field. So I feel that I had something to do with, as a visionary, in opening up women's sports. And then I was able to write an original tennis film, which I sold to my good friend Robert Evans, who was head of production at Paramount for many years, and then decided to just stay with his own production company there and do his own films. And his first film was My Players, and I wrote it for Farrah Fawcett and Vinnie Van Patten, who were with me in all my celebrity charity tournaments all over the country. And Vinnie had the role, and I never could get. Bob was going through a divorce with Phyllis George, former Miss America, and Bob was doing all his work at his home, his fabulous home, right in back of the Beverly Hills Hotel, and he didn't want to bring Farrah Fawcett over to the home until he could get Phyllis George out of the house. He didn't want any problems. Finally gets her out of the house. We canceled the meetings twice, and Phyllis finally leaves, and Bob says to me, now bring her over. And Jay Bernstein, her manager, turned me down and said, look, she was ready to go twice. Third time, no good. No longer interested. So it ended up with Ally McGraw, and ended up with Dean Paul Martin, who I started teaching at the age of 12, Dino's son.
Oh, sure.
And were the stars. Maximilian Schell was in it, Steve Gutenberg, and Jerry Goldsmith did a wonderful musical background. And we were the first company ever allowed to shoot on the hallowed grounds of Wimbledon, right on the stadium court. And I must say, one of the great memories of my life, they allowed me to go on the court and talk to 15,000 people on the day of the finals between the women. Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova are playing the finals at 2 o'clock. Now, at Wimbledon, it's not 5 seconds before 2 or 5 seconds after 2. It's 2 o'clock, and they walk out with their rackets, and they get on the court and start rallying and playing their match. And so 15 minutes before 2, they allow me to get on the stadium grounds with the handheld mic. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, we're shooting a film here called Players, and we hope it's going to be it's a wonderful tennis film, and has a lot to do with Wimbledon and its heritage. And I'd like to introduce now the 2 players that are coming out and simulating that they're playing in the finals of Wimbledon. And I'd first like you to give a nice welcome to Dean Martin's son, who happens to be an excellent tennis player, and he's a member of the Phoenix Racket World Team Tennis Team, Dean Paul Martin. Nothing. A couple of things, a couple of boos. They don't know who Dean.
No.
What's Dean Martin Jr. doing on the stadium court at Wimbledon?
Yeah.
And so I realize it, and I pick it up immediately, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, coming out now to play opposite Dean Paul Martin is the current U.S. Open champion, Australian Open champion from Argentina, Guillermo Vilas. Now they start to applaud because he's a major champion. He'd won 64 straight matches on clay, great-looking guy, beloved. And so now they start to applaud, and he comes out. And I said, also, ladies and gentlemen, playing the coach for Dean Paul Martin is a legend, one of the all-time great champions, Pancho Gonzalez.
Oh, wow.
And he stands up, and the other coach is Jan Tiriac, who was the coach and promoter for Guillermo Vilas, and very well known, the Romanian at that time, wild guy. And now the crowd is going wild, 15,000 people, and they come out and they start to rally, and the real photographers down there, they start taking pictures like it's really happening,
Yeah.
And the crowd's going wild, and all of a sudden I get the cue, and I said, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We had 8 hidden cameras throughout the grounds, and said, that's it, everybody off. And about 25 seconds before 2, we're all gone, and the 2 girls walk out on the court to play the finals. I mean, that was
something.
That was exciting.
Wow.
Those were moments.
You've had a fantastic career, and what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm 75, and I will never allow myself to be out of this wonderful business. It's greatest business in the world. I'm still creating. I've just finished a screenplay that I've been working on called Once an Angel, and it's based on one of the most corrupt crime cases in the annal of jurisprudence. I've turned it. I almost sold the true life story. It involved a group of outlaw bikers in New Mexico who were framed for indicted on a first-degree murder and kidnapping charge. And they were framed because the district attorney and the chief homicide detective and the sheriff had re-elections coming, and there was this horrible murder and no leads, nothing. They need a conviction for the re-election, otherwise it doesn't look good for them.
Sure.
So these outlaw bikers happened to be in town, and they got thrown in jail on some petty thing, and they got this old woman that worked at a motel where a lot of the bikers used to come and hang out and stay overnight. And they coerced her, and they threatened her. They threw her in jail unless she cooperated, and she came out with a statement saying that she saw these guys murder. They committed the murder. So they're indicted, and they're sent to the death chamber, and the real murderer turns himself in months later, sees God at a Baptist mission, and sooner or later, to cut to the chase, the guys are freed, etc. And I signed up some of those bikers. That was a harrowing experience, believe me. I got releases from them. I never could get releases from the district attorney or something because they were now being indicted, etc. I almost sold the life story, the true story, to Dino De Laurentiis. But there were legal problems and whatever. It didn't come about.
Mhm.
So over the years, I've stayed with the project, and I decided not to have any legal problems. I would turn it into a love story and fictionalize it using that background of a biker, in this case a Hell's Angel, being fraudulently indicted for a murder. And based on some of those same circumstances and others. And I've just completed doing a reconstruction, and I've got a way to go on it. I use some of my own life experiences in it, but it's a picture that will resonate with the young people that, that they command the international box office. So it has that target audience, and there'll be a lot of controversy. The Hells Angels, this takes place in the late 70s, not the Hells Angels of today, because they are bad dudes. They're into, all the drugs, the manufacture, the distribution. They're tied up with the Mexican cartels. They're with the phony politicians on the under the table payments. It's big business. But they were a piece of folklore, They were folk heroes in the late 70s. And they personally, they had the crystal, the methamphetamines and stuff, and the different color pills and stuff. But they weren't into the big business of it. And so that's when this takes place. The Hells Angels is the most recognized and outlaw biker club in the world. They have chapters in every continent, so it works for me.
Sure.
And there's a lot of controversy, and I use that controversy for the marketing. Because today, if you don't have a picture with the right target audience and you can't market it,
That's the
and
key.
I have the built-in marketing solution,
That's great.
plus a product placement tie-up with Harley Davidson.
Oh, that won't hurt.
A Hells Angel must own a Harley Davidson American-made motorcycle in order to be a member. And so I've been working on a tie-up with Harley Davidson. Also, I had a meeting a couple of months ago with the head of the Hells Angels, George Christie, at the Ventura Club. And I used that club in my film because that club opened just at the time that my picture takes place. It's one of the major Hells Angels clubs. Sonny Barger, you probably heard of his name. He's been the spokesperson, has really made the Hells Angels what they, to the media. All those years. He's more or less retired in Arizona now. So George Christie has taken over. Just as a fluke, I called up the Ventura Club, and the next week this guy calls me back. "You Tommy Cook?" I said, "Yes." "I'm George Christie." "Oh, well, thank you. I didn't expect to hear from you, Mr. Christie. What do you want?" "Well, I'm doing this film. It involves the Hells Angels. I want to tell both sides, and I don't really have any pictures in all my research of the Hells Angels at that time period in the 70s. And I was just wondering if maybe you might have some pictures, and I would love to come and meet you. And you can't come over to the club. You come over to my house." I said, "Well, that would be fine. Where do you live?" He says, "You get on the freeway and you go up, and when you're about 20 minutes from Ventura, you call me. I'll tell you where to go." And so I take a martial arts expert with me who is has his own Harley Davidson, has his own company where he rents out Harley Davidsons to people from out of state that come in and they want to go on these tours, So he knows everything about the Harley Davidson bikes, and he's been sort of a consultant to me because I don't know anything about the mechanisms of a Harley Davidson, I know all the aesthetics, I know all the drama, I know my story and everything, but I don't know how to break down a Harley Davidson. So he's been helping me, and he's also a martial arts expert, and I took him with me. So I stayed with him for 3 hours. Couldn't have been nicer.
Really?
And in the 60s, when they had these films, these laughable films about outlaw bikers, and some of them mention Hells Angels, but there has never been a film where they showed the patches and the colors of the Hells Angels on the back of their vests. They've never allowed that. And so this will be, hopefully, the first film. Well, I'll have the cooperation of the Hells Angels. I'll be able to show the colors and the patches. I have to make a very sizable contribution to the Hells Angels. There'll be a lot of controversy because a lot of the clubs don't want the publicity. But I've got George Christie you know, and so it's a very, very interesting and
Boy, I guess.
situation. But it's the best piece of work, Jerry, I've ever done.
Wonderful.
I've learned so much about screenwriting. I sent the script in its first stages to a writer by the name of John Wilder. I grew up with Johnny in radio. He, along with my dear friend Frank Brzee, who, Frank, he's the greatest memorabilia genius of all time and has done just about everything in radio. He was Little Beaver, too, when I got too old. But Johnny, his name was Johnny McGovern when he was a little kid and played Little Beaver in the Red Ryder show. We stayed friends all these years. Changed his name to John Wilder. He became the producer-writer of Streets of San Francisco. Remember that with Carl
sure.
Malden
Yeah.
and Michael Douglas.
Yep.
And then he created a show with Robert Urich, the first show in Las Vegas. Brilliant writer.
Mm-hmm.
Lives up in Santa Barbara. I sent the script to him. I said, I only want your honest opinion. Break it down for me. And so he sent me 9 pages of problems and suggestions. And I brought in this brilliant woman consultant to work with me, and I think we really hit it now. And I'm very, very proud of it. So to answer your question in a long, convoluted way, that's my main project. In some way, I'm gonna find a way to put this.
Super.
Yeah.
One thing I haven't asked you: marriages, family.
I was married to one young lady, Elizabeth. We're divorced now, but we're still very close. We have a 20-year-old son who lives with me, Mikhail. He's a computer whiz, and he's gone through all the teenage problems. But he's settled down, and he's got doing some great work. I have an 11-year-old daughter, not biologically, Claire, and that's the name of my young lead in my film, Claire. And not biologically, but I was there when she was born, and she's been my daughter.
Oh,
and she is my daughter, and I really love her. And I have a adopted daughter who's 23, Hispanic, from an orphanage in Ecuador. I was down there with Pancho Segura putting on a celebrity event. That was his hometown, the great Pancho Segura, tennis champion. And I'd bring down 8 to 10 celebrities. Did it 3 or 4 years. And one year it was for their orphanage called FANN, F-A-N-N. And my wife went through the orphanage and found this little girl. And after a lot of red tape and monies and being interviewed by the police and the FBI, I could never have adopted her at my age in the United States. But I was able to do it because we had a lot of power going with us, with the president, ex-president's family helped us. And we brought her back. We thought she was 5 or 6 years old. And then we took her and had x-rays of her wrist and found out she was 9 years old, because you never really get the right information on what they have.
Yeah.
She was there in that orphanage when she was 2 or 3, beaten up and left for, on the streets. And in Ecuador, there's no middle class. And when you get to a certain age, you no longer can stay in an orphanage. And so she would ended up being a prostitute or a washwoman. And my ex really is the one that did all this, and we gave her a chance in life. She's very
Wonderful.
close to me now.
Oh, that's
she
terrific.
has 2 kids of her own, and so those are my 3 kids.
Wonderful.
But I'm so proud to be a part of the entertainment business. I'll tell you 2 quick things. I went to, years ago, I was invited to a Western Film Festival in North Carolina, and I took my son with me. My mom kept my original Little Beaver costume. I was the original Little Beaver in the film, The Adventures of Red Ryder at the Old Republic Studios with Don Red Berry, before Robert Blake played Little Beaver with Bill Elliott in a series of films. This was a 12-episode serial. So I was brought back there as a guest as the original Little Beaver. And so I took my son, at the time was about 10 years old. Well, no, I guess he was about 12, but he was very short. And I put my Little Beaver outfit on him, to be there. Talk about nostalgia. So now I'm there, and they start showing the different episodes in this one room, 16 millimeter. And they finished one episode, and they're rewinding to get it, And they said, well, now, while we're rewinding it, a little question and answer. Anybody want to ask any questions to Tommy Cook, Little Beaver? And somebody asked me a question, and I went blank, just like I've done a couple of times for you tonight, Jerry. And tears start rolling down my eyes. And finally I got a hold of myself, and I said, I apologize, I'm sorry. But those days bring back such memories that I wish I was back there. Those were the happiest times in my life, working with those great actors and those great stunt people, David Sharp and Yakima Canute, all those world-famous stuntmen. And I had, those were the happiest times with my parents. They were proud of me, and I said, it just hit me, and I broke down, and I said, I apologize.
Oh, yeah.
And but it was reliving those beautiful moments when you had no cares and no worries, you know, and working with these great people. And I will always be a part of this business. I never want to retire. I gotta keep creating. And someday I'm going to be up there at the Academy in some way. I'm a member of the Motion Picture Academy, the Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, etc. You know, when people get up and at the Academy Awards and they say, I want to thank my agent, and I want to thank my mom up there. I can see your mom. And I want to thank my sister and my brother and everything. And I'm so tired of that. I'd like to see somebody get up there and say, I'm proud to be a member of the entertainment industry, because the most wonderful, the most creative, the nicest people in the world are a part of the entertainment industry, and I'm proud to be a part of that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Very good. Tommy, it's been wonderful talking with you, and appreciate taking your time to record your audio
thank
history.
you. I hope I didn't bore you too much,
No,
Jerry.
no. We've been talking with Tommy Cook, recording his audio history for the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. This is Jerry Fry, and thank you for listening.
59 minutes.